this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Lowe's knows Sundays are for football. So tackle your home improvement projects by Saturday and earn your Sunday with great deals on LG and Bosch appliances, select Bounty and Swiffer cleaning products, and more. Then once your to-do list is done, get ready to kick back, relax, and enjoy the game. Shop in-store or online now and earn your Sunday with help from Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1109 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. The Late Round Draft Guide is officially done. It's out there. If you pre-ordered, you should have it in your email inbox. If you haven't, you can still order right now to get some game theory breakdowns, ways to spot breakouts and busts, rankings and tiers, and so much more. Those rankings and tiers and my players to target, my players to avoid, the late round darts list, they're going to be updated every single week up until the final Friday before the start of the season. So check it all out over on lateround.com. It's a mailbag week, though. I've got some good questions to answer, so let's get to it. The first question this week is from @true0654. It says, what are your thoughts on Ashton Jeanty this season? He was an amazing prospect in a terrible environment last season. Is it improved enough to be worth his ADP this year? So my overall stance is that I'm higher than the market on Jeanty, but there's some detail that we need to talk about here. First off, one of the things that people have come to me about with Jeanty, and Bowers too, is the stuff that I talked about on this very show about the impact of rookie quarterbacks and the impact they have on the personnel in their team. I've done episodes on this in the past, where rookie quarterbacks tend to result in players underperforming in fantasy football, players on their team. But I think it's important to be clear why we see what we see. It's because the offensive environments of rookie quarterbacks are usually pretty poor. It's just shorthand for basically saying that we, as a market, are often too bullish on what first-year quarterbacks are going to do for their offenses. This is not a foolproof thing. Not every player who plays with a rookie quarterback ends up underperforming. Essentially, it's like a proxy for understanding which offenses might not be that good. But if a player's in a bad offense or an underperforming offense, what's the way they can still be useful in fantasy football? It's volume, right? This is why I actually can get behind both Jeanty and Bowers this year. Chances are, if you were to pull 1,000 fantasy football players, I'd be more pessimistic than optimistic about this Raiders offense. I see the upside, I see the intrigue. Clint Kubiak is there now, they signed Tyler Linderbaum, they got Colton Miller back at tackle, and they probably are going to have a hard time being worse in the passing game than they were last year. But chances are, this is not going to be a studly offense. But they're studs. They're probably going to see just an insane amount of volume. People pay way too much attention to efficiency metrics at running back or previous season rushing production. I legitimately don't care about Ashton Jeanty's 3.7 yards per carry rate from last year. There is zero predictive power to that singular number. It doesn't mean that he's going to be great. It just means that specific reasoning for his demise is completely overblown. Especially when Jeanty was second worst in yards before contact per attempt. The Raiders' offensive line ranked 30th according to PFF's run blocking grades last year. Jeanty's coming off a rookie season where he saw an 87% running back rush share. And all Vegas did with their running back room was add an athletic specimen with an average at best age-adjusted college production profile in Mike Washington. Meanwhile, their number one wide receiver is who? Trey Tucker? Jalen Naylor? That can and it will have an impact on Jeanty's target share. I'm not a believer in straight up vacated targets the way that others are, because targets are earned and situation changes from one year to the next. But target share is always a 100% pie for every team. If players are incapable of commanding high target shares, then that provides a higher target share ceiling for the guys who are capable. There's only been one other rookie running back since 2011 to hit an 80% running back rush share and a target share as high as Jeanty's last year. And that running back was Saquon Barkley. Volume dictates future volume. And there's such a lack of competition on this Raiders team. It only seems reasonable to project Jeanty with a really high workload. And even in a mediocre to bad offense, that can be fine. But what if the offense surprises? What if they exceed expectation? That's where the ceiling outcome can really come into play. I think Jeanty belongs in the tier after Christian McCaffrey right now. Now, I'm lower than the market on Jonathan Taylor, so I have Jeanty in a tier with him and James Cook. That alone means that I'm more in than out. This next one's from Paul via the Late Round Members Hub. It says, what does it actually mean to read the draft room? I know I'm supposed to be doing it, but it feels like in my brain, that becomes overly simplified down to, oh crap, everyone is grabbing running backs. I guess I should too. Yeah, I think this is a really fair question and reaction. And I think it's an important topic to talk about. I've actually never broken this down before on the show. But to me, reading the room is seeing the direction that your league mates are going in the draft. See what positions they seem to be drafting a lot of. Most of you are going to go into a draft with some plan. You have some idea as to how things are going to go down. But you don't know if it's actually going to go down that way until the draft is actually over, right? So let's just say that you go into it, you think everyone's going to be valuing running backs really highly. And then they just keep drafting wide receivers. You need to react to the way that the draft board is falling and read the room. Read the fact that they're drafting these wideouts. Now, how do you do that? Well, you should know what you can get now and what you can get later. And the easiest way to grasp that is through tiers. Like, I think a lot of analysts will tell you to not fall victim to a draft run, which is what you're alluding to in the question here. Everyone's drafting running backs and you say, oh man, I really need a running back. I'm going to get one too. But that can actually be okay sometimes because there's a chance that those running backs are all in the same tier. And you see that tier is running out soon, so you get the running back who's also in that tier of players. What you shouldn't do is just blindly take that position because everyone else is. You potentially devalue that pick. Let's just say, as an example, someone takes Josh Allen in your league 20th overall. Lamar Jackson goes 21st overall. Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow, they go 22nd and 23rd overall. You shouldn't sit there at 24th overall and say, oh man, I got to get a quarterback because all these quarterbacks are flying off the board. Because you know there are plenty of good options later at the position. And there's a huge opportunity cost in taking one that early. The only way you should consider a quarterback is if you know that 90% of the picks from that 2-3 turn until your next pick is going to be at quarterback. That's highly unlikely though in a single quarterback league, even in a superflex league. So you're reading the room by seeing who they're picking and evaluating if you need to be doing the same thing, or if you can find that kind of value later. Reading the room is also about understanding what your league mates are doing to see if you can extract value. I did a best ball draft the other day on the YouTube channel where I was in the 111 spot. The person in the 12 spot took Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow at the 5-6 turn. I didn't take Lamar because I have a lot of him and it didn't fit my build as well. But knowing that team had Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson meant that I could squeeze out more value when it was my turn to pick. So round 7 came along and I wanted Justin Herbert because I had Amari Hampton and Ladd McConkey on this team. But Jalen Warren had fallen. So I got Warren knowing that the team with Burrow and Jackson likely wasn't going to take a quarterback. And they didn't. So I got both players that I wanted. I got both Jalen Warren and Justin Herbert. Reading the room is about understanding tiers and where there might be drop-offs, and then playing the value extraction game based on other people's rosters. This has questions from Twitter. It's from @CanYouTicket. It says, Bucky Irving, how concerned are you after last season and being banged up this offseason? Look, I'm pretty concerned. In best ball, his ADP is kind of reasonable. But that best ball ADP is not what you're going to see in season-long drafts this year. And what you see on various platforms. You'll often get Bucky Irving after pick 60 over on DraftKings, so into round 6. Consensus ADP across multiple big platforms like ESPN and Yahoo have him as a top 50 player. And that kind of cost is where I'm out. Because I'd rather be taking someone like DeAndre Swift over him. I like a lot of the upside for the year 2 backs in that range. He did average 13.9 PPR points per game last year, but he also finished last in rushing yards over expected per attempt, which isn't everything, but when it's at the extremes, I'll pay a little bit more attention. And going back to what I talked about earlier, some rushing metrics are going to be better than others. But that's not really the crux of the argument for me. It's more so that his expected touchdowns were just 2 last year, and he saw 0 goal line attempts. Sean Tucker played that role down the stretch for Tampa Bay. And then you look at the receiving workload and look, he's actually been pretty good per route run throughout his career. Irving should probably be used more there, but they added Kenneth Gainwell this offseason. That's sort of his specialty. So my fear with Irving is that he's seen as somewhat of an interchangeable piece with Kenneth Gainwell. And then he's more of like a between the 20s player rather than someone who gets a lot of work at the goal line and then gets a lot of work through the air. And I don't think the goal line stuff is really going to change given these injuries, given his health. It's just a tough sell overall. This next question is from Jamie via the Members Hub. It says, "Hey JJ, apologies in advance for the long question. Everybody seems to always be looking for true X receivers as the most likely to become difference makers. Obviously, the ability to play outside is important, but with the trend in recent years across the league of using too high looks often, it feels like the success of vertical routes has been limited. Some of the studs over the past few years have differentiated themselves through having the X receiver build, but thriving in slot usage. Drake London, CeeDee Lamb, even Jamar Chase and Jameson Williams using their yak ability. Is there something to be said for finding difference-making receivers by identifying a certain build with high slot usage? Or is it as simple as bigger route tree equals bigger talent indicator?" I mean, yeah, we want versatility with our elite wide receivers. I did that episode on the death of the fantasy football wide receiver 2 to start this offseason, but I also did an email newsletter follow-up where I talked about the death of specifically the slot receiver. In recent years, we've seen fewer pure slot receivers across the league. Last year, there were only 3 who had a 70% slot rate while running at least 300 routes. That's according to PFF data. That was by far the lowest that we've seen since 2011, and it wasn't even close. We also saw the lowest number of 50% or more and 60% or more rates. So the pure slot guy is kind of disappearing. And my theory is that teams are using more tight ends to replace those types of looks. If you look at the share of slot targets that have gone to wide receivers, so overall slot targets to wide receivers and tight ends, and the proportion of that that's going to wide receivers. If you look at that, there's been a consistent downward trend since 2018. So pure slot players, they're kind of disappearing. The Khalil Shakirs of the world are not very common. But slot work is still what we're after. According to True Media data, the typical slot target has generated more fantasy points per target than a typical perimeter target. And that's based on pre-snap alignment. And it's not by a significant amount. But think about the types of players that are seeing those slot looks historically. Because this is over the last 10 years. There's a bias to this data. Better players are the ones who are playing on the perimeter more frequently. So you're still getting more points per target out of the slot despite those better players generally playing on the perimeter. So yes, having versatile playmakers who can play inside out is always the goal. But taking this a step further, I think it's also part of the goal here because it shows intent. It shows creativity. If an offensive coordinator is moving his best wide receiver all around the field, then that's probably a coordinator worth caring about for fantasy football purposes. A bigger route tree is important because you want these guys to be on the field for every single dropback. You want the ability to play inside out. You don't want a guy who can only play in the slot. That can cap his upside, as we've seen with Josh Downs and Jaden Reed historically. But hopefully that changes this year. We're going to end today's show with a question from @OnlyAndrewYouKnow on Twitter. It says, "Love the pod. Thanks. Would love to hear your 30-second bull case and bear case for the late first/early second round running backs, as I'm having difficulty ranking them. To me, that's Jonathan Taylor, Ashton Jeanty, Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Walker, Amarian Hampton, Devon Achane, James Cook, and Chase Brown. They all seem clustered together. Thanks." So I love that you asked for both the bull and the bear case here, because I think looking at all angles is really important. And then you guys can kind of decide. But here's a very quick bull case and bear case for each of those guys. Some I like more than others, which you can see in my rankings, which are both in the draft guide and on lateround.com for members. Though I do think that most of these guys just fall into one giant tier. So Jonathan Taylor, the bull case. He was averaging over 27 points per game through week 10 last year. And even through the next few weeks before Daniel Jones tore his Achilles, he was averaging almost 25 PPR points per game. The bear case. Taylor's yet to see an 11% target share in a season, and he outperformed touchdown expectation by 4 or 5 touchdowns last year. Ashton Jeanty, the bull case. He's an elite prospect who saw a rookie season workload that's really only been seen by Saquon Barkley since 2011, as I talked about earlier. The bear case, last year's woes were partially his issue, and the offense doesn't take a step forward at all this year. Saquon Barkley, the bull case. Kevin Patullo is an awful offensive coordinator, and it led Saquon Barkley to seeing by far his lowest rate of 20-plus yard runs of his career. The bear case. Barkley's 2025 was just the start of him being on the wrong side of the age apex, and Philadelphia's offense doesn't see any improvement without A.J. Brown. Kenneth Walker, the bull case. He sees a true bell cow workload and dominates in the red zone with one of the best offensive minds of this era as his head coach. The bear case. He's reached an 8% target share just once in his career, and he doesn't take on a big enough receiving workload to pay off this price tag. Amarian Hampton, the bull case. The Chargers' offensive line is one of the best in football, and Mike McDaniel helps LA become a top 3 offense, allowing Amarian Hampton to lead the NFL in touchdowns. The bear case. It's a 3-headed backfield, and Hampton doesn't see enough touches to warrant his ADP. James Cook, the bull case. He takes on a larger receiving workload and completely dominates because he finally has a true bell cow workload. The bear case. Touchdown regression hits hard, and he's still not able to hit a 10% target share, something he's yet to do in his NFL career. Devon Achane, the bull case. The Dolphins' offense is better than expected with Achane as the focal point, where he does hit that 20% target share. The bear case. Malik Willis is a disaster, the Dolphins' offense is bottom 5 in the league, and Willis's mobility caps Achane's receiving ceiling. And then finally, there's Chase Brown, the bull case. He's the bell cow and one of the best offenses in the league, continuing to dominate receiving work after hitting a 14.5% target share last season. The bear case. Not only does Samaje Perine continue digging into his rush share, but Brown sees a serious decline in receiving work too. So there you go. Not overly scientific necessarily, but I think you can make bear cases for most of these guys pretty easily, despite where they're being drafted. It doesn't make them bad picks, it's just recognizing the volatility of this game. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you have subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. I'm actually taking a family vacation next week, so you won't have a completely normal schedule for this podcast. You'll get an episode on Tuesday as usual, and then we have a special Becoming a Best Ball Bro for you too. But that's it for next week. But I'll be back and I'll be refreshed the week after. And that's when things really get going. Take care, everyone.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.